And welcome, everybody. This is Prophecy News. I'm your host, Brother Dan Goodwin. Good to have you with us today. We've got a special guest in the studio today, and we're going to talk about an interesting topic for a prophecy station. We're going to be talking about evolution. But it's not what you think, because I happen to be one of them guys that believes everything is involved in prophecy. And, people say, what does evolution have to do with prophecy? Everything. Why is that? Because if the beginning of our Bible is wrong, if you can't trust the book of Genesis, if you can't trust the creation story in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, then how can I trust Revelation, the second coming? How can I trust that there's really a rapture? How can I trust my Bible at the end of the book if I can't trust the Bible at the beginning of the book? Well, we got a guest with us today that's going to talk about that very thing. He's an expert in this field, and he's written a book called The Glass House, and I want to introduce him to you. Brother Bodie Hodge.
How are you?
And you are from the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter. Tell us a little bit about you before we get into your book here.
Well, I'm a speaker, writer, and a researcher with Answers in Genesis, and I've been working with the Ministry of Answers in Genesis somewhere in the neighborhood of about 17 years. And, I've been involved in a number of books, a number of book projects, and it's been fascinating. I've absolutely loved it.
So the main thing of Ken Ham and the Creation Museum, the Answers in Genesis, the main thing is creation, isn't it?
Well, we deal a lot with that. We like to think of ourselves as a biblical authority ministry, particularly around Genesis, around origins in particular. So that puts us right in the middle of the creation evolution debate, but it also puts us in a handful of other debates as well. But what we want people to understand is the Bible is true from the very beginning to the very end, and it should be the authority in every matter.
Now, I heard that you married the boss's daughter.
I sure did.
That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I married Ken's oldest daughter, Renee. And we've been married now about 16 years, and we've got 4 wonderful children.
And I asked you yesterday, does she have the accent? And you said she does not.
No, she moved over when she was about 9 years old, and so she had an accent then. But all the kids are like, "Oh, you've got an accent," so she wanted to get rid of it. So she kind of lost it. But there's still a few words here and there.
Can she fake it?
No, she can't. It's horrible if she tries to fake it. I can do a better Australian accent than she can. But
that's sad.
But she can understand Australian really well. She knows the words.
Now, your father-in-law, Ken Ham, I think he's getting close to 70. You wasn't sure exactly.
He's getting up there. Ken is he's an incredible man, wonderful speaker. In fact, he's one of the most sought-after speakers when it comes to creation. And he travels not just the United States. I think he's been to all 50 states and spoken. He's also been to multitudes of countries. Just to give you an idea, recently he was in Mexico, the UK, and he's all over the place.
I think you said he's in Australia now.
Yeah. But here's what's interesting. With the opening of the Ark Encounter and with the Creation Museum even, we have so many people coming to us. We actually give lectures there. We reach a lot more people just giving lectures there than we do going out to places.
Yeah. All right, now I've been to the Creation Museum. I've been to the Ark. I've been to the Ark twice. And I got to say, if I had to choose, if I could only do one of them, I'd go to the Ark.
You go to the Ark?
And I've been to both of them, and they were both good.
I've heard people say both. I've had some people say, well, I'd rather go to the Creation Museum. I think it depends on your niche, what you really like. The Ark is fascinating. It is a full-size Noah's Ark. You can walk through it. You get to see how they caged the animals, how they cared for the animals. You get to even see living quarters and so forth. The one thing I don't think they put in the Ark was the restroom facilities for Noah and his family. But don't worry, there are restroom facilities in the Ark.
Yeah.
Plenty of them. But, with the Creation Museum, it's a walk through Bible history, particularly walking through Genesis 1 to 11, creation, the fall, the flood, the Tower of Babel, and so forth.
Now, it's considered Cincinnati, but it's actually in Kentucky where I live.
Right.
I'm 3 hours from it. I live in Kentucky. I'm near Owensboro, and I can be there in 3 hours to the Ark. And it's... You fly the Cincinnati airport is in Kentucky.
It is. It's in Kentucky, and that throws people for a loop. They thought they've been to Ohio because they fly to Cincinnati all the time, but really they've been to Kentucky, not Ohio.
Listen, the Creation Museum, 5 to 10 minutes from the airport in the Cincinnati airport. I think the Ark is a half hour from there.
Yep, about that.
If you want a vacation or you want to do something with your family, forget Disney. Go there during the millennium. If it's there. Go see the Ark, go to the Creation Museum, be entertained and have a great time, but learn something at the same time and do something that'll change the lives of your children.
Yeah.
I highly recommend that you go.
It's an incredible family place. I mean, you could spend a whole day there. There's a zoo at the Ark. In fact, we have a petting zoo at the Creation Museum. There's zip lines. You know, if people are, if they're that daring,
I'm
you know,
not
they
going,
can go for
I'm
the
not
zip
that
lines.
daring.
But I mean, there's incredible stuff, camel rides and things like that too.
And
So
at
it's
Christmas
great.
time, I think it's just at the Creation Museum.
Well, it's at the Ark and at the Creation
They
Museum.
have lights and stuff. It's
That's right.
really
We
something.
set up lights. It's a great time to go. In fact, we have a lot of people come in December for those very reasons. You can walk through the light show, but we also have a live nativity at the Creation Museum. A lot of activities going on at that time.
Now, did you say that your father-in-law was going to give me free lifetime tickets? For
You know, I'm pretty sure he didn't say that.
He
I
didn't
didn't know
say
where
that.
you.
Well, is that something you could bring up in the next meeting?
I could try. I have a feeling though. There's not a lot of promise.
All right. Now we're going to get into this important book, and we're going to do another program as well. So don't panic out there. We haven't got into his book yet. And there's a lot to talk about. If you see all my sticky notes here,
Right.
But just before we do, you've written a series of books, volume 1, 2, and 3. This is heavy. This could open a door in your basement.
It sure
or
could.
something.
So if you don't like it, you can use it as a doorstop.
doorstop. There's 3 books in here about world religions and cults. There's also a map. The map's worth the whole thing.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
this big map of all the world's religions.
Yeah, all the different religions where they split apart from
and
God
where the
and His
flood
Word.
was and all
Yeah,
that.
in fact, this book set, if I can grab it, I'll
Yep.
hold it up here for a second. We actually deal with about 60 world religions and cults, but we start with an interesting premise. We start with the fact that there's only 2 religions in the world. That's it, just 2. God's and not God's.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't come from God, one way or another, it comes through the mind of man. Even if it is satanic or demonic, it's still presented usually through the mind of man. That's called humanism in its broadest sense. So all these other religions, one way or another, have used man's ideas to take people away from God and His Word. And it's fascinating how that works, whether it's Buddhism, Confucianism, Shinto, or even atheism, which is religious, by the way. Even when people say they're not religious, that's a fancy way of saying you're a humanist, because you've already rejected God and His Word
Okay.
to hold to man's ideas.
All right.
So it's a powerful
Good.
set.
Now, we have that on the website, and you can order that right from Prophecy News. And he also has a book called The Tower of Babel. And I'm anxious to read this. I have not read this
Yeah.
yet, and I'm anxious to read this.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's also on the web. Just tell them 30
Yeah.
seconds, Tower of Babel.
Well, yeah, the Tower of Babel, most people have been taught we evolved out of Africa from lower creatures, and finally we got smart enough to build our own rudimentary houses, and we're hunters and gatherers. Then we get smart enough to have our own civilizations. But you know what? No ancient historian said anything of that. In fact, ancient historians give histories of their cultures, and most of them go right back to one of Noah's sons, grandsons, or great-grandsons. It's incredible when you look at that. So not only am I looking at the Tower of Babel, it's archaeology. I'm looking at the people and where they came from. And I actually have a lot of maps in here, you know, like, I don't know if you guys could see anything like this, but we have a number of maps of Noah's sons, grandsons, great-grandsons,
and where
so
they
forth,
went, what
and where
direction
they went to, and what people groups came out of them. It really is fascinating research.
All right, good. All right, well, the book in hand that we want to discuss in the program today and also next week is called Glass House, Shattering, and I like this, Shattering not the theory, but the myth of evolution. And Rex will put that up on the screen. Theory is crossed out here, and the word myth is handwritten in there
Right.
in red ink. And boy, that really gets your attention.
It sure does.
So
Boy,
tell me about that. This thing about the theory of evolution. It's not
Right.
really a theory, is
Well,
it?
that's right. See, a lot of people, they don't understand what the word theory actually means with regards to science. I'm a science guy. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in mechanical engineering. I specialized in material science. And here's what the word theory means. It means something that's very well attested to that doesn't have anything against it. And so when people want to say, well, evolution is a theory, what they're saying is, well, it's very good. It's very well attested to. But it's actually not. There's so many arguments against it. It doesn't make sense of the data. And there are more problems with it than you can shake a stick at. And that's what we're dealing with in this particular
All
book.
right. So you've crossed out theory. It's not a theory because a theory has to have some facts that go with it.
Yeah, it's got to...
A
gotta be
theory is
coherent.
something that's not absolute, but there's this evidence that
Right.
points to it might be true.
Right. In
But
science, a theory is one step below a law. So that gives you an idea how a theory is meant in the science world.
Okay.
But yeah, I would say model, hypothesis, idea, religious viewpoint, myth is a great word for it. So those are what I would prefer to say. You know, an evolutionary account, but it's definitely not a theory. It's definitely not a law. It's definitely
right.
not the truth.
Okay. Well, as I read through your book, and I did, I actually, I'm sure I didn't read every page, but I skimmed through this and I found a lot of interesting things that I wanted to share with the audience here. We're going to talk about millions of years and where all that stuff came from. But let's start right here at the beginning.
Okay.
In the preface here, you made a statement here: evolution, molecules to man, in parentheses, is a glass house. Explain what you mean. And of course, the title is Glass House.
Right.
What does that mean?
Well, a glass house is something that can shatter and break very easily. This concept of taking matter, taking it all the way up to man, I mean, there's so many problems with this, it's not even funny. First off, how do you get life from non-life? We've never observed it. We've never been able to repeat it. People just believe it with a fervent religious belief system. But we've never seen matter all by itself give rise to life. So that's a huge problem right off the bat. And then we've also never observed a single-celled organism like amoeba. Let's just say it did happen. We've never observed that change into something like a man or a dog or a goat. We've never seen those types of evolutionary changes. Now, we do see changes in animals. We see changes in people. You and I, we look different. Dogs look different. Cats look different from each other. We see variations in the cats, variations in the dogs. But what we're not seeing is cats changing into elephants or
Right.
amoebas changing into dogs. We're not seeing those kinds of
And
changes.
we don't have what we all learned years ago: the missing link.
Right.
There's no half man, half monkey.
Right, we don't see that. In fact, we have a whole chapter in here, that looks at these so-called missing links. The world wants missing links, and the reason they want them so bad is because they don't really have them. There's a handful of things out there that people want to argue about, but I mean, there should be billions of these things.
It's as hard to
Billions.
find as Russian collusion.
Yeah,
My
yeah. If
goodness.
you want to put that out.
Yeah,
But
that's how hard it is
yeah,
to find.
Yeah, it really is. Now, there's three ways people try to make a missing link, if I can explain that, because that's actually really important. If you're going to try to find some sort of ape-like missing link between man and some sort of lower ape-like creature, well, there's three ways to do it. One, you take bones of an ape, take bones of a human, you put the two together, and you try to build a missing link. Homo habilis is a great example of that. I know I throw fancy words out there, don't let it scare you. But Homo habilis, think of it like a box. And you're walking around in Africa, you're looking for a missing link, because apes are in Africa. Darwin said we must have evolved out of Africa then. So you find a bone, you don't know what it is, you throw it in the box. You move around somewhere else, you find another bone, I don't know what it is, throw it in the box. After a while, you get a box full of bones.
And they ship them to London or something.
That's right. They pour them out on a table and they build a missing link. But that's not even a real creature. The second way to make a missing link is you take an ape and you try to make it look like a human. And so there's many instances of this. Australopithecus afarensis, once again, fancy name. That's Lucy. That's
Lucy.
One of these ape-like creatures. It's actually very similar to a chimpanzee. A couple of exceptions. Its jaw's a little bigger. Its carrying angle's a little higher. But outside of that, it's a variant form of a chimpanzee. But what do they do in a lot of museums and a lot of artist representations? They have this Lucy with human eyes, human hands, human feet. They're putting human-like features on it, but it's just an ape. And
Well,
of
you're going to
course-
get a lot of more interest in that. You're going to get a lot more publicity.
Oh,
and
yeah.
sensationalism.
Well, that's right, because if you can find a alleged human missing link, well, you could potentially be a millionaire.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
of course, people are going to look for that because, the museums will pay to put it on display. And, of course, the last way to make a missing link is take a human, try to make it look like an ape. Neanderthal is a great example of that. They wore clothes, they buried their dead, they made musical instruments. They're descendants of Adam. But what happens is they try to put ape-like features on them. So those are the three ways people are trying to make missing links. And whenever they find something, boy, it's all over the news. Oh, we found something.
And of
but
course, our kids grow up with these cavemen and
Mhm.
TV movies and cavemen and prehistoric.
Yeah, I watched
Prehistoric. How
growing
can
up.
there be anything that's prehistoric?
There
There's-
isn't. In the
there's
beginning,
no
God
such
created
thing
heavens
as
and the earth.
prehistory.
That's right.
So let me just read a little bit of what you said here. A glass house in its name implies it is not a sturdy structure. It is ripe for shattering at a moment's notice. Then you said, in our culture, many have been deceived into believing that evolution is a solid foundation and is well attested. After all, it's integrated into nearly all subject material at most schools.
Yeah, and we've seen that shift over ever since the time of Darwin, and even his precursor, Charles Lyell. He's the one that really popularized it millions of years. But those ideas started getting the universities, and it moved down to the high schools, it moved down to the elementary education. And now, we've seen it filter. It's not just in biology. We see it in earth science. We see it in history classes. It's all over the place. It's permeating.
Okay, chapter 1. What is evolution? The three types to recognize. We don't need to talk about the three types, but I highlighted what is evolution. That sounds very simple, but I
Right.
think a lot of people
Yeah.
need to understand what exactly do you mean, or what do people mean by evolution?
Right. Well, a lot of people automatically think biological evolution. And what they mean by biological evolution is we evolved from some ape-like creature. And if you go back far enough, it's a single-celled organism. But evolution is much more than that. For example, I don't have anybody come up and say, all people evolved from the single-celled organism about 6,000 years ago. I don't have any, nobody says that.
Nobody.
No. So that's actually predicated on this belief of millions of years. This idea of millions of years is actually called geological evolution. So you have geological evolution, you have astronomical evolution, that everything came from a big bang. There was nothing, there was something, it exploded, and billions of years later, you get
That's harder
all
to
sorts of
believe
things.
than have belief in God.
Well, I know, because we can't observe it, you can't repeat it. See, science is observable and repeatable. When you can't observe and repeat things, it's not really science, which goes to show the religious nature behind all this.
Yeah.
People believe it's science, but it's really not. It's a
I mean,
religious
to believe
viewpoint.
that everything came from nothing in some big bang and evolved into
Mhm.
this articulate thing that we have today,
Right.
that's not believable.
Oh, I know. I mean, if you just think about it, but see, millions of years is like it's like the magic word to try to say all this stuff happened over millions of years, but we don't observe it, you can't repeat it, so that's a problem.
This was good in your book on page 34. What do you trust, you asked? When it comes to evaluating the evolutionary worldview, there is a lot to try to understand. But all of this ultimately comes down to a matter of authority. Are you going to trust man's word, or are you going to trust someone else's word?
Well, that's what it comes down to, isn't it? And see, it's like that with every religious viewpoint. Either you're going to trust what God says in His Word, or you're going to reject God by your own authority. You're going to have to reject God and hold on to some other false view. Right now, we're in a culture where the secular forms of humanism, atheism, agnosticism, things like that are dominating our culture. It's dominating our education system. It's dominating our museums. It's dominating a lot of the media even. And so when people hold on to this false religious viewpoint, they must reject God and His Word. So it's an issue of authority. You're going to trust yourself. You're going to trust God.
We threw God out of the school.
Mhm.
I think we rooted him out of the home before we threw him out of the school.
Yeah, they may well have.
We took the 10 Commandments out. We took the Bible out. No more praying.
Mm-hmm.
Evolution was snuck in there, and I mean, and we wonder why our kids act like animals. They're taught that they are animals.
They taught that there are animals and that people are no different from a mosquito. What do you do to a mosquito?
Yeah.
And kids are taught that way. And, I see these school shootings. I see all these horrible things that happen in schools. At first, we might be shocked by it, but this is exactly what they're being taught. They're living their lives that way.
Folks, we're talking to Bodie Hodge from the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter over there in Cincinnati area. And we're having a good time talking about his new book, The Glass House. If you'd like to get a copy of this book, by the way, it's printed in, I think, 2019, right? This is brand new.
Yeah, it's a brand new book.
Brand new book.
Mhm.
Now, you're not the only author of the book.
Correct. I'm one of the authors, and I'm a general editor with Ken Ham.
Okay.
And we worked with an all-star cast here. People from Harvard, people from graduated from Brown University. I mean, we've got some experts in here, so
Okay.
it really is a powerful book.
All right, folks, if you'd like to get a copy of this book, go to the website on your screen, prophecynews.com. You can get this and the other books that we shared with you earlier. It's all on our website, or you can call the 800 number during working hours, and you can place your order over the phone. Okay, let's jump right back into this. I want to read a little bit more that I skipped here. Are you going to trust man's word based on assumption, or are you going to trust the intelligent God who has revealed Himself to us in His creation and in the pages of Scripture and in the person of Jesus Christ? I think that's powerful.
Well, it really is, because when people realize that the Bible is the absolute authority, Bible is the truth, well, guess what? The message of the gospel found in that same Bible is also true.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's directly related to the gospel in our culture.
And like I think I said at the beginning of the program, I said, well, what does evolution have to do with prophecy? Everything. Because if we can't trust the beginning,
Yeah.
in
Why would
Genesis,
you trust anything else?
yeah, why would I trust John 3:16?
Jesus made a comment about that to Nicodemus. Jesus was talking to Nicodemus, and Nicodemus wanted to hear about the heavenly things, but he really just didn't trust Jesus on the earthly things. And Jesus cut to the heart of it right there in John chapter 3. He said, if you do not believe when I speak of earthly things, how would you believe when I speak of
That's
heavenly
right.
things?
Yeah.
And Genesis is full of these earthly things. The geology, for example, the astronomy. God created sun, moon, and stars on day 4 and so forth. If we can't trust what God says in Genesis about those earthly things, why would you trust the Gospel of John or the book of Revelation or anything else?
2 questions here. Science, does it contradict the Bible? And number 2, You say in the book here, the foundation for science is biblical Christianity. Talk about that.
Oh yeah, science actually comes out of a biblical worldview. Most people don't think that. Most people are at the state of thinking, well, science has to be secular. All these secularists are. In fact, as you go to college, you go to geology or biology. Most of these colleges are teaching it from a secular viewpoint. So people want to try to mix the secular with the science, but they don't realize science actually comes out of a biblical worldview. And here's why. God promised to uphold the world in a particular way. He is the sustainer. He's the creator. Genesis 8:22 says God upholds the world in a particular way. Seed time and harvest, cold and heat, day and night shall not cease so long as the earth endures. So, the Lord is basically stating that he's going to uphold the world in a particular way. Now, of course, he can go around that if he wants to do miracles and things like that, which we see in Scripture. But by and large, that gives us the basis for observable and repeatable science. In fact, most fields of science were developed by Bible-believing Christians. You might think of Gregor Mendel with genetics, or Robert Boyle. There's a host of these guys, Louis Pasteur and so forth. These guys were standing on the Bible when they developed these fields. What's happened is the fields of science have been hijacked by the secular world, and so they've been taken over by the secular side.
So science, if it's right, will never contradict the Bible.
That's exactly right. What happens if someone thinks that science is in contradiction with Scripture, then what it is their understanding of science is actually incorrect.
Right.
So it's interesting. If you look up definitions of science going back into the past, you go back to Webster's 1828, for example, it says the science of God must be perfect. The knowledge of God must be, because science literally means knowledge. That's what it means. And so, God's always right. So when it comes to science, God's always going to be right. And what's happened is that definition's actually been pulled, and now they've added a new definition under science called naturalism.
That's why I recommend, and folks that watch this show know I mention it all the time, I use only Webster's 1828.
You like to use that, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what I liked about that is he defined words based on the way they're used in
the
Scripture.
Scripture's in there.
Yeah. And that's fascinating. Nowadays, all of a sudden, definitions can be anything if people can just come up with it. And that's what we're starting to live in. I mean, people are starting to redefine words, saying they mean something entirely different.
Like gender.
Well, gender, that's one of them, or gay. The words and the meanings change. Even the word story has changed.
You watch the old black and white movies, they'll use the word gay all the time. And it hits you funny now.
Yeah.
But it meant something totally different then.
Well, just think of the Flintstones. Remember the theme song to the Flintstones? We'll have a gay old time.
Yeah.
Now people look at that like, whoa, what does that mean? Well, you got to understand the definition has shifted out from under it.
Yeah. Now, later on, you also have a chapter 5, creation versus evolution. Is it an authority issue? I think we've already hit that. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
Well, yeah, and one of the things that I wanted to deal with, particularly in here, is a lot of times Christians, even though they stand on the authority of the Bible, they want to give up some parts of the Bible to start moving over and accepting an evolutionary worldview. What they want to do, they want to take maybe Big Bang, millions of years, or evolutionary ideas, some of that geological evolution, or some of that astronomical evolution, or biological evolution, and they want to bring it over and they want to mix it with their Christianity. And I know in the book we've got illustration with some castles on it, and one of the things on the castles is you have certain Christians that are shooting our own foundation.
I'm looking at it right now.
Oh, you're looking at that right now. And so what that does, when you shoot your own foundation, you're saying, I can't trust Genesis. Let's shoot our own foundation. Let's go over here and borrow the world's viewpoint.
And now next year, what are you going to shoot?
That's right. If you blow out your own foundation, you're gonna have a big problem.
The creation versus evolution debate is not entirely about creation versus evolution. It's almost a tongue twister there.
Yeah, I know.
Creation and evolution are just part of the debate. Creation and evolution are like two different castles standing in opposition of each other. And I don't think y'all can see the picture of the castles there, but I'll hold it up anyway. There's several diagrams and pictures and things throughout the book for us folks that have a hard time reading. We have pictures.
Yeah.
And amazing stuff here. This kind of leads us to the theistic evolution thing, which seems to be Christians trying to justify their belief in evolution by trying to put God in the middle of it.
Yeah, and really what this is, let's just step back. These are two entirely opposing religious viewpoints. And what's happening is many Christians are taking the secular world and they're bringing it over here and they're trying to mix it with their Christianity. That's actually technically called syncretism, when you try to mix two different religions. It was interesting, when I went down to Peru, I went down there was a lot of Catholicism, and a lot of the Catholicism had intermixed with the local pagan religions. For example, we go into these big, beautiful Roman Catholic buildings, and you go in, and they would have stuff to worship, say Jesus on a cross or Mary, that sort of thing. And then they'd turn over, and they would have some of the pagan gods set up, and you could worship them right there. And so they mix the two. And to me, I'm like, how are you guys doing this? Well, they've grown up with that. But what's interesting is people from Peru would come up here to the United States, and they would look at the church, and they're like, what are you doing? You're mixing your Christianity with secular humanism. Why are you mixing these two religions? And a lot of people have grown up with it. They just don't realize that they're mixing the two.
Yeah, and it seems to be an American thing, leading the way.
Yeah, or at least part of the Western world. We see it in England, Australia, some of those places
We've
as well.
strayed so much from the Bible. I think we watch too much Hollywood.
Well, we've definitely let the world influence the church, which is the sad part.
Let me make a statement here, because this is one of the questions that we were going to talk about. Has evolution infiltrated the church? But let me answer this
Yeah,
one.
go for it.
I wrote, because I'm a preacher.
Oh,
and
yeah,
I wrote
right.
down these 3 things. We watch the wrong people, the wrong stuff. We watch the wrong programs. We read the wrong books, and we follow the wrong men. That's why we go down these roads.
Well, if I can add to that,
Yes, please.
and think of this. This probably happened to you as it happened to me. My parents sent me off to state schools. And when I was at state schools, I was taught evolution, millions of years, Big Bang, all this over and over and over again from a very young age all the way up. And by and large, here I was going to church, Sunday schools, and youth programs, and that's right. And I mean, I was there all the time. And when I mean I was at church all the time, I was there all the time, good 2 or 3 hours a week, which doesn't sound like much, considering that I was at school for 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
So by and large, I was sent over to an entirely different educational system that taught me a different religion. And so I was heavily influenced by a secular worldview, Big Bang, evolution, millions of years, and I struggle with that. What do I do with it? Do I try to mix it with my Christianity? And so, I struggle with that all the way through my college years, actually.
Now, next week, we're gonna hit pretty good. We're going to hit the gap theory.
Okay.
We're going to hit where did the million years come from. But I want you to deal with the gap theory just for about a minute. But we'll deal with it again in the next show. But I think folks want to know what is meant by the gap theory.
Yeah.
Do you believe the gap theory? What's the big deal about it?
Right. I do not believe gap theory. In fact, we discuss it in the book. We've got a number of resources on it. Gap theory was developed by Thomas Chalmers. He was a theologian in the 1800s. And when he was presented with this idea of long ages, millions and billions of years of rock layers, he didn't know what to do with it. So he said, you know what, I'm not going to deal with it. I'm just going to put it right over here. Let's just put it between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. And he put it there because you can't put millions of years in the genealogies from Adam to Jesus. You just can't. They don't fit there. So he had to go back before Adam. So he put it between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. And he said maybe that's associated with a Luciferian fall or a Luciferian flood. But of course, you run into some big problems with that. One of them is, what do you see in those rock layers? You see evidence of death, pain, struggling, suffering, animals eating other animals. And yet at the end of the creation week, God declared everything very good. That would make death and suffering very good. Furthermore, if Satan had fallen between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, then that would make Satan in his sinful state very good. In fact, that'd make sin very good. So it had to occur later, Satan's fall anyway. But.
Well, we're going to hit on that in great detail
Excellent.
in the next show, and I just wanted to whet the appetite there. Folks, you've been watching Prophecy News with our good friend Bodie Hodge and his new book. Go to the website and get it. And listen, we'll see you next time. Keep looking up.